Hi, and welcome to the Real Estate Nerds Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Royal Smith. I'm the owner of Royal Legal Solutions, your one-stop shop for everything tax, legal, and real estate investing. I am here today with Steve from Blueprint Title. He's going to be sharing with us a lot of really hot tips about what should we expect going on with title right now. This is exceptionally important for a lot of you because I've been getting all kinds of phone calls and emails from everybody trying to sell property right now. Right? For a lot of different reasons into it. And one of the biggest pieces that comes into this is like what's happening with title, right? To be able to effectuate that sale. So if that's you or you think that might be you, this is going to be an awesome episode for you to really get down and dirty with some of Steve's deep knowledge into what they're doing with Blueprint Title, which is one of the most exciting title companies that I've ever had the opportunity of talking to. With like the really great stuff they're doing. So if you're looking at somebody that's really on the cutting edge of what's happening on the technology and the user experience when it happens with title, you're not going to find anybody better than Blueprint Title for that. So Steve, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and a little bit about Blueprint Title and what types of people you're helping?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the intro. I hope we can help some folks and appreciate the kind words. My background, I was a lawyer in Austin. I was doing high-tech M&A, kind of really boring corporate work. Most corporate lawyers really don't want to be corporate lawyers. They want to be their clients. And so I did the same thing, left and started a company. I was in the professional sports space. We built that. We moved to Nashville. We sold that company. And I was buying a little bit of real estate kind of on the side. And after we sold the company, I was starting to work on what do I want to do next. And the part that always drove me nuts, I pulled out a settlement statement and I just said, like, let me follow the cash. The biggest line item on the settlement statement was the mortgage. And I said, well, there's already people doing really interesting stuff in the lender world. And the next line was brokerage fees. And I said, well, there's already people doing interesting stuff in the real estate brokerage world. The third biggest was title and closing. And no one could tell me about it. It was the thing that had always bugged me when I bought properties. Why is this just so arcane? Why is this so antiquated? Why am I sitting in this little room signing 100 pages of paper that I've never seen before? And what was it? And I had this opportunity to do this really deep dive and figured out it's just this really broken industry. And part of what makes it broken is it's a single stop shop across the industry. There's one title shop. That title shop does all the work. And so 95% of the files that come to them are traditional mom and pop buying their homestead. And when I was bringing an investment property I wanted to buy, they didn't know what to do. They didn't understand why I wasn't using Wells Fargo for a mortgage. They didn't understand why I wanted to use a HUD instead of a CD. And they didn't understand why I didn't need them to hold my hand on a settlement statement, that I knew what it was. And for me, that was an opportunity. How do we build a closing shop that really focuses on sophisticated buyers and sellers? So we do a lot with REITs and hedge funds. We do a lot with builders. But the majority of the work we do is with fix and flip and landlords. We do a ton of wholesale, frankly, in the last couple 6 months. And what we know is what we're all looking for is a slightly different insurance product. It's not a 30-year insurance product. It's how can we save money on this insurance? We're happy to tell people what kind of title they should be getting and if there's a cheaper way to do it. And then closing. How do we move this online? How do you do document management? If you're buying one property a month, you're also selling a property a month, right? So you have 2 transactions every month. You may have 3 or 4 open things at any one time. If you're living in email and trying to sign paper, pen and paper, that's a really hard way to work. And so how do we build tools and systems that do that better? And that's the basis of Blueprint. We're live in 15 states right now, pretty much every major investor state. We'll be live in 25 by the summer, provided state governments stay open, and working with hundreds of fix and flip investors to try to make the world just a little bit easier, try to understand your business.
That's awesome, Steve. And I know that's one of the things that I've run into time and time again with title companies. It's just about there's not really anybody else besides you guys that's really built for the investment type of community, right? What's neat is that you guys also are pretty well spread out. Like you're able to operate through a number of different states. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, we centrally process everything just like you do. Like you're buying properties all over the state of Texas or all over the state of Nevada, but you're going to do that from your home. We do the same thing with title and closing. Most of our team is in Nashville, Tennessee, but we have folks from Florida all the way up the East Coast, in Ohio, Kentucky, across to Texas, across to Colorado and Arizona. Not live in California yet, but pretty much everywhere else.
That's awesome, man. So I know, like in this type of climate that we're coming into, that things are really in flux, right? With like the changing of government and everything that's going on. So like, what's open, what's closed? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. And that stuff's changing day by day, right? Like we got new advice last night that was like game changing advice on what we can use for notaries. I think most importantly, real estate is considered essential business in most states, right? Not true across the board, but in most markets, real estate is. And that means that your lenders should remain open and closing shops should remain open. And then importantly, recording offices are going to remain open. And what we know now, and again, this kind of updates every day, but most recording offices are still open. And we can dive a little bit farther into what that means, but um, you know, most have either figured out how to move online, or they're keeping one person in the office, or they're accepting documents. And that means there could be a delay in recording, but things are still moving. I think the thing that's really important right now, Scott, is lenders are getting a little jumpy. I'm sure you're seeing that as well. We've had a number of hard money lenders who have called us this week and said, look, we're going to pause all of our loan activity until we know more about what's going on. And that's just because they can't figure out appraisal, and underwriting is really hard. And so deals aren't canceling, they're just pausing. And so, folks who are doing cash purchase, folks who are doing private lending, they're still being able to move forward. And we frankly haven't seen much of a slowdown. Obviously, the biggest slowdown is on new properties because it's hard to walk through new properties these days. But any projects that are currently open should close, and any properties that you're comfortable driving past and doing a curbside inspection, those can close pretty quickly and pretty easily still today.
Are you saying that there's opportunity inside of like the investor space for people that are able to buy in cash right now? And what does that look like?
Yeah, without a doubt. So what we know is all of the iBuyers have paused activity, right? And so you don't have open door to fight with it right now. You don't have hedge funds to fight with right now. And if folks are taking big hard money loans, or if they have a credit facility, right, the folks that you worry about because their cost of capital is lower than ours is, they're not buying, they're on pause. And so if you have access to cash or cash-like materials where you're not worried about a true appraisal, there's absolutely opportunity because we know there's fewer buyers on the market.
I've also heard too that a lot of the sellers I've started to kind of pause like what the inventory is out there on the market. And I've heard those articles out there like online, and then I'm like, I've never had more people hit me up out of my base. Asking me about like how can they sell their properties and like issues that they're having with trying to do that and navigating those pieces. So I'm like sitting here being like trying to navigate it myself, like what the heck is actually going on here?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're seeing that. We have a property where, they were most of the way down the road with an iBuyer, and the iBuyer called them and pulled out. Well, that person was still planning to sell the property. That person was still, ready to move out on Tuesday. They're now looking for another buyer, and if you can come in at the same purchase price to value, they're already ready to sell. And so perhaps that market's already been primed, and individual investors with the opportunity for capital can come in and swoop those deals.
Very, very cool. And so when it comes into the operational pieces of actually being able to execute like the full buy for everything, we talked about a little bit of like the recording offices that are remote and delayed. Are you seeing that actually impact closings, or does that mean some closings can't happen in some states?
Sure. So it really matters state by state, right? If you're in North Carolina and you're in a race state, what that means is you got to get the recording in before you're going to be willing to disperse any of the funds, right? And you're seeing that, and if you're investing in North Carolina and a handful of other states, you know that that's already part of your process. In other states, in Texas and in Nevada and Tennessee, in Florida, what you're seeing is the recording office is evidence of the transaction that already happened. And so what often happens is you'll finish your transaction, and then you're waiting for your title company to record the documents and come back and issue you a policy if you bought title insurance. If the recording office is totally closed, that creates an additional risk because you can't record and put people on public notice. But again, The only recording offices that are closed as of today, and it's April 1st, are some smaller counties spread around the country. Most of the counties that we're all working in, those recording offices are open, and they're either on delay or they're accepting documents but not file stamping them. And what that means is when your closing happens, your deed is being sent into the county. The county is recording that came in on April 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern. They're not going to do all the work to sort of go through that they need the personnel for. But if any other deed came in, it came in after yours is in first position. And so you're still protected. And that's the important part of recording is you're putting people on public notice and you're still protected. And so even if you're delayed, my suggestion is if you hear about the fact that your county government or your state government's delayed, I would ask your closing shop, right? Like, how does that affect the closing and what risk am I in? Whether, or frankly, ask Royal Legal, right? What risk am I in if my county is a little bit delayed? And it's going to matter place by place. But most of the big counties we're working in are still open, even if there's a slight delay.
Awesome, Steve. And I know that there's some people right now that are looking at like remote closings and what you have to do to end up doing a remote closing. They don't want to travel and they want to try to do it there in their house where they can kind of control the environment a little bit more. Who do you see, do you see a lot more people doing remote closings right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's really important to understand the difference between the types of remote closings, Scott. One that you see a lot, you're seeing RON on everything, RON, RON, RON. RON is remote online notary. And that can mean a couple different things. Remote online notary is what you think it means. You get on like we are with a webcam, and I find this so silly, but you hold your driver's license up to the camera so that the e-notary can see it. And then the e-notary, you upload the documents, you e-sign, and the e-notary can put their notary stamp on the documents remote. It's an interesting system. The problem is to get that done, usually if you're notarizing something, it's a loan package, right? There's only a handful of things that have to be notarized, and most of those documents have to do with a loan. Most lenders aren't accepting a full remote online notary. And so just because it's legal doesn't mean that your lender will accept it. And so often what remote online notary really is, it's called hybrid. And that means that you do some of the documents online and you do some of the documents in person in front of a notary. And while that might save you some time, time isn't what we're worried about right now. We're worried about face-to-face. And so if you have to see a notary, that's not really remote. What we often say, Scott, I'm not a huge fan of remote online notary. I think it's a tool that can be helpful and it can be great, but I call it cassette tapes. It's more efficient and it may be a little bit more convenient than a record, but it's clearly not the future, right? It's a huge downgrade in service and it's not what we're going to do. And so what you're seeing a lot of states come up with and what you'll see, I think, in the next 18 months is a truly remote experience. And that's what we actually focus on. We focus on, first of all, can you e-sign for this closing? If you're a cash buyer, in almost every state, you should be doing an e-closing entirely. You don't need a notary on your documents. You don't need an in-person. And you can do everything online. And then if you do need a notary, if you're a seller, there are a handful of things you can do that aren't fully remote online notary. One of those is a power of attorney. So if you're uncomfortable leaving the house, but you have an associate who can leave the house, you can use a POA. You also can appoint just anyone, frankly, as a POA. Not everyone understands that. Power of attorney, an attorney, in fact, it doesn't have to be an attorney, just has to be someone that you trust and are willing to work with. And then the other thing that we're seeing a lot is hybrids. People are getting creative. And this is actually something that Blueprint's been doing for a long time, is a hybrid of a power of attorney or an LLC authorization, if you formed a single member LLC for your purchases, is a hybrid of an e-closing and a power of attorney. And the important part there is you want to make sure that anyone you're granting a POA to has your best interest in mind. And so one of the ways you can do that is say, you can't execute this document until I've e-signed the document. And that way you have full authority over everything you're doing, but you don't have to see anyone face to face. And what I would recommend is if you're uncomfortable or if you're trying to figure out how do I do this remote? And frankly, not just you, but how does your seller do it remote? Because often that's what we're worried about is our sellers, especially if they're older or if they're in poor health. We don't want to have to ask them to leave the house. Ask your title shop, what can you do? Reach out to Scott, reach out to Blueprint. If we're not live in your state, we'll find someone who can do this for you. Because, real estate is an essential business, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to mitigate face-to-face when we can.
That's an interesting thing, Steve. And we haven't actually done that too much in terms of actually becoming somebody's power of attorney to execute documents on their behalf, mainly because that's the operational strain that get put on it because things have to move so quickly, right?
Yeah.
With it, right? So it's like, well, do we always have a staff member that can be available and 5 minutes notice to be able to go through a legal process? Well, actually right now, we actually have extra staff, right? Because of everything that's kind of slowed down in our province. So we're actually looking into that type of option or that type of service. And I know that's something too that's been really important to our clients. Are like, hey, I'm traveling around the world. I want to effectuate a transfer. And there's like other pieces that have to happen on the legal front, but I'm in France and my property is actually closing like there in Chicago. What could I do? And in times of that scenario, they've asked, hey, Scott, is there things that you could do to help me with that? So if somebody is like in that scenario where they're out of state, but they're actually selling properties in different states, like how would Royal Legal help them be able to do that in conjunction with Blueprint?
Absolutely. So one of the things I would list is remember that you can always do a limited authorization. And so most of your clients, Scott, have formed an entity, right? Most have some domestic LLC that they're buying and selling out of. And that means they don't have to do a power of attorney. What they can do in again, almost every state is they can draft an LLC resolution and you guys can draft it for them. So you're drafting an LLC resolution that for an express period of time or for a certain property grants you wet ink authorization. What that would mean is Blueprint could send those documents for full execution, no matter where they are in the world or where they are in the country. The borrower or the seller could execute those documents electronically. And then Royal Legal could wet ink those documents as an authorized signatory, or anyone else could do it, but I agree, you guys are the best case because you're trustworthy already. So you can execute as an authorized signatory, and any title shop should be willing to accept that because the LLC gets to make the decision. And frankly, what's actually really cool and easy about this is LLC resolutions can be e-signed, which means, we have a one-page form, Royal Legal has a one-page form. You quickly draft up that resolution. We can email it to you or we can send it to you via HelloSign. You're going to execute that, send it back. And just for that one property or for the 1 month or for the 3 months that we're in this, right, you can grant someone else the authority without having to grant them the power to make the decision.
Very cool. And with that too, right, with the powers of attorney as well too, like let's say somebody has the property like inside of their personal name, is that that's where you typically would have to, you can't do an LLC resolution for that, right? So you'd end up having to do like a power of attorney for whatever state that they're domiciled in. So if like they're in Chicago, it'd be for like a power of attorney drafted underneath like Illinois statutes. And I think those they actually have to have notarized for most powers of attorney, right? But for that, you could actually do like a remote online notary, because it'll still be legal, and we don't have a lender implication with that. So then they could execute that. That gives us a limited scope to be able to act on their behalf, to be able to sign whatever documentation for them if they're set on a personal name or a trust or something like that.
Awesome.
Right.
Yeah, you got it. So you're doing your attorney or we, if it's us or Royal or whoever it is, can send you that POA, and there's a bunch of remote online notaries. I happen to like Notary Camp. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I've never met anyone at Notary Camp, but I really like them. It's relatively inexpensive. You can sign on, you get into a queue. And if you only have one document to execute, it happens really fast, and it's $25, right? Many of us spend more than $25 for a remote notary to show up at our house. And so it's a relatively inexpensive way to get it done. And then once you have that POA, then you can execute everything online, or you can assign someone to do the work.
That's awesome, Steve. Well, a wealth of knowledge in today's episode, brother, about what's going on, and especially as we see here about ways to navigate things through COVID. But also, I think just really helpful tips about, where does the future of title look like, and then how can you make your life easier, right? I mean, I'm a huge fan of being able to find systems and processes that allow other people to control parts of my life for me underneath particular rules, right? I mean, because it just means like I get to make a decision, and then I just tell that person, and then the cascade of processes happen after that. But I'm off doing my own thing. And that's what I look forward to working, more deeply. And that's the kinds of things that we do at Royal Legal. It sounds like that at Blueprint, very much of the same type of ideology of like, how do you actually make people's lives better? And so I look forward to being able to work deeper with you on that, of how we can really work here in the space around that. So for everybody that wants to reach out to you and contact you, Steve, and get in a deeper relationship with Blueprint, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, awesome. So my email is steve@blueprinttitle.com. The website is just blueprinttitle.com. Come check us out. See what states we're in. Feel free to shoot me a note. We're a little bit like you, Scott. We've got a full staff. We're still pretty busy, but these are the questions we're answering every day too, right? How do I get this done? How can you make my life easier? How can I keep working during this crisis? And so anyone we can help, please give us a shout.
Yeah, likewise, man. I think we're all trying to help people navigate through the storm. What's going on. It's no longer business as usual. It's really just kind of like every day we're having to figure out a whole new problem set with it. So everybody, check out if you're looking at selling the property right now. I would just go ahead and get in contact with Steve at blueprinttitle.com. They have their website there at blueprinttitle.com. We're going to have listed all of the different states that they're able to operate in. It's a number of different states, and they're always expanding. So if you check it today and 6 months later, you're thinking, hey, I have a property I want to sell, check it again. They might be in that state by now at that time, and it'd be worthwhile to be able to find out and be able to experience like what that next generation of title company actually looks like and feels like, and how it makes your life easier with that. So thank you guys for tuning in to the Real Estate Nerds podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Scott Royal Smith, owner of Royal Legal Solutions, your one-stop shop for everything real estate asset protection. And look forward to seeing you guys here again soon on the Real Estate Nerd podcast.